One. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of the Jason Howell Company Speaker Series Zoominars. My name is Jason Howell, and today we're leaning into a new focus, strategic partners. Now, since our firm's inception in 2015, we've always believed in surrounding our clients with a team of advisors, team of experts. And although not all those experts work for Jason Howell Company, many of them have worked with our firm for nearly 10 years. One of those strategic partners, Catherine Schott Murray, a nationally renowned estate planning attorney out of Odin, Feldman, and Pittleman. She's also a shareholder. I like to call Catherine the ultimate strategic partner. Yes, pun intended. But before we get to asking her a bunch of questions about estate planning, where it's been, where it's going, let's first just welcome Catherine to the Zoominar and see how her morning's been. So Catherine, how has your morning been?
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Jason. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's been a busy morning thus far, and we'll talk about charitable giving back to the community, but I started with a board meeting for one of the boards that I sit on and for the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia. So that's where we started, and here we are talking about estate planning, which ties in nicely with charitable giving.
So you're saying you started by giving this morning. Is there a better way to start?
Absolutely. We do serve.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not surprised. As I've said, I've known you for a really long time now, which has just been a great delight to have you in my life and in the life of many of our clients. I did a smart thing this time. I invited all the Zoomers in before we started our video. So I'm going to go right to our shared document today, and we'll be able to get started without a lot of dings in the back of my ears. So if you came to Estate Planner, the ultimate strategic partner, you came to the right Zoominar. And yet I'll still have to admit a few folks here. So welcome, glad you're here, and certainly glad that Catherine is here. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Now, before we fully get started, let's just get a word from our sponsor. So our sponsor is still Jason Howell Company. We're family wealth advisors, and we like to specialize in helping what we call first generation wealth folks transition to what we also allude to as family wealth. And we do that in a number of ways. Of course, we have great technology. Of course, we do comprehensive financial planning, but our unique ways are sustainable investing, even doing family governance. That's something that's unique to our firm, especially a firm of our size. But the best way we do it, the way we enjoy doing it, is working with strategic partners like Catherine. So let's get to her story. So here we are. Many of you may have seen this biography if you came through the newsletter and came to this event. I wanted to focus on just a couple of things that maybe wouldn't have stood out to you right away. Now, Catherine, I admire because she's had what I call a very straight line career. She's the kind of person you would want in estate planning because she's been doing it quite a while. So once again, glad you're here, Catherine. I've got a couple more folks coming in here. But a couple of things I wanted to highlight out of here, which I thought were really interesting. Most people know about estate plans. Not everyone realizes sort of the benefits of asset protection or generation skipping transfers and all those. And we can't get into those today. But wanted to touch on what you mentioned earlier, Catherine, the charitable planning work and some of the other work you do as a volunteer for the community. Give us an idea about that.
So certainly, I think a lot of folks, when they think about their legacy, they think about, not only their family, but what their give back to the community. So one of the ways that folks can do that is through donor advised funds. And there's a variety of ways that people can give back to their community, whether directly to the charity of choice or to a donor advised fund that they can then grant out monies over time or in the future, or have their children be involved. So that's part of the legacy conversation that I will have with clients. But the other thing to think about beyond charitable giving is that May is National Elder Law Month, Jason. And so
what? I thought it was just Cinco de Mayo and May Day and May the 4th be with you. Now there's also this. Okay.
So it's important to remember our elders and our seniors. That's part of the legacy as well when we talk about families. And you talked about the being a family office and generational family governance. That's part of the elder law conversation that we have.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned that. And speaking of that, when you think about family office and going into some of these sometimes more technical areas, I would love for you to speak a little bit about the differences maybe between a donor advised fund and a private foundation. People often think if I want to be charitable, if I want to be a philanthropist, then I have to start a foundation, but maybe I can do something else.
So private foundations are a separate entity. You would create the entity through the state, and then you have to apply to the IRS for tax exempt status. And it's very heavily regulated. There are ongoing compliance with the IRS versus the donor advised fund, where you can work with a community foundation, or for some folks that they work through their investment advisors who have their own donor advised fund platforms where you can donate the money and then there's a fund agreement in place. And you, as the donor, have control as to where that money can go, but you're not actively investing it. You don't have to file a tax return. You have the ability to have some level of privacy as well because you've made the donation to the community foundation. And then ultimately, where the monies go, you may have had some input into the direction, but it's from that community foundation out to the nonprofit and not you directly. So it depends on your goals and objectives. But I have found over time that unless we're talking very significant large dollars, that a donor advised fund may make better sense for a family going forward.
No, it makes sense to me. Our business partner, my business partner, Doug Tees, he's our philanthropy hat for our firm. And so I'll certainly continue to make sure you two talk now and again. Before we continue, I wanted to just, again, I viewed and love this idea of your straight line career that you've had. You started in politics, or at least for your undergrad, but Spanish also, JD, LLM, very, very good sort of list of education. Did you just know early on, I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to know how the world worked? What drove you?
So I would say from the age of 6, being a lawyer was on my list of items to be, and
Wow.
it became a direction that I chose very early on. Estate planning came a little while later. I never thought I would be so heavily into tax planning, but that's just a natural component to estate planning and what I do.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun curve, so to speak, from that perspective. But yes, certainly from early on, wanting to be an attorney was always there.
Did you like the early years of doing some business work at some firms? Was that interesting to you?
It was very interesting from the perspective of they married together, working with business owners, doing mergers and acquisitions, and then helping them with their exit planning. There's a lot of tax planning. There's a lot of estate planning that goes into that. Again, going back to that legacy of what they want to do with the money they may receive, having built up a company, and now they're looking towards what's next.
Neat. Can you touch on, dare I touch on, like what drove the idea around political science for an undergrad degree?
It's a natural major for those who want to go into law. It seems there's a lot of political science majors that go on and get their law degree. At least when I went through, and we're not going to talk about how long ago that was. So,
No, it's just very recently. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your background. I think sometimes people don't realize there's a full person when they see an estate planner. You're real people too, and I've certainly been had the opportunity to experience the real person that is you. So thank you again for being here.
absolutely, thank you.
All right, now what you've been waiting for, some of the Q&A that can really help us untangle this idea, this term, this concept of estate planning and the strategic partnership that I know you bring to many other advisors. So let's start with that. Why, besides the pun, is estate planning and working with an estate planner kind of the ultimate strategic partnership?
Well, I view estate planning as not only is it relationship based, but there's a whole picture to our clients that I might not get the whole picture. You have part of the picture, I have part of the picture, and there are others that come to the table that have part of the picture in order to talk our clients through their goals and objectives and what they're trying to accomplish. There might be family dynamics, there might be tax issues. And so I think partnership is key. I view it as I'm a partner to my clients, but then I'm just one of those people at the table.
Just one of those people at the table. Talk a little bit about when you're at the table. You're at the table at the beginning and then also at the end. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. That's true. Estate planning is a timeline, so to speak. When I explain that timeline to my clients, we're here, they're capable, they're making decisions, but we're going down the road a little bit. We might be talking about incapacity planning. What does that look like? What are their goals? Who's in charge? Do they want to stay in their home? Are they looking to move to a retirement community? Who will support them? So the team may expand at that point. Not only do we have someone like Jason, but we might now be bringing in a care manager. We might be bringing other family members to the table. Then we continue forward and death has occurred. And that's always a transition period. And it's a difficult one, not only from an emotional perspective, but there's a lot of to-dos. And if we've had time to plan for that transition, perhaps there was a diagnosis and an illness that took some time, people were able to get their affairs in order. It makes the transition a little smoother, at least on the financial and the legal side. But if it's sudden, there's just a lot of have-tos and a lot of people coming at you, and people are grieving. And so having that partnership, having someone that you can turn to just ask that question of, I got this thing in the mail, no idea what it says. It seems like it has some benefit. What am I supposed to do? That's where we come in. We can help. I know you do the same thing because there's financial questions, there's legal questions. It's just usually a year of busyness following death.
It seems to me, and this isn't always the case, that estate planning can almost be coupled under or brought under risk management. Except there's 100% risk that some of these things are going to be a part of your life at some point, at some time. I've heard it said that you want a lawyer during the most terrible times in your life. You want that support person. It appears to me too that estate planning, as much as folks may drag their feet in being a part of that process, you really want that your family wants that process sometimes at the worst, or they want the result of that at the worst times of their life. It's the greatest opportunity to have that relationship.
It is. And I mentioned it's a transition period. And since folks are grieving and they're focusing on the emotional side, perhaps the change of family dynamics, if that transition can be as smooth as possible, it's a true gift that those who have done the planning give to the next generation or whoever they end up having in charge. Perhaps it's a couple who doesn't have kids, but they have nieces and nephews, or perhaps it's now we have a single person or a surviving spouse, and we have to, they've now passed away, and the next person who comes in to be in charge has it all laid out for them. They have a roadmap.
A roadmap. Neat. And we call our financial plans roadmaps. So definitely get the terminology. Well, tell us a little bit about how estate planning has evolved over the years. And I highlighted in here, especially since 2020, because I was talking with you through those years, and there were some changes that almost needed to be made to make these things work.
Yeah, so estate planning, just the process of estate planning, here we are on a Zoominar. So a lot of people now, it's virtual meetings. It's a lot easier for people to connect. Still, from estate planning, at the end of the day, we do need wet signatures on documents. So that's
wet signatures. Okay, that didn't change. Okay.
Depending on the jurisdiction, there are some jurisdictions that have allowed for remote notaries, but at least I practice in the DMV area. Virginia is not one of those that allows for remote signature on estate planning deck. I know, but to a certain extent, I have my opinions on that. Simply because as people age, it might be good to have the FaceTime with a client to make sure we are accomplishing their goals and wishes and not anybody else's, quite frankly.
Yes.
But just since 2020, I think a lot of people realized that estate planning was important to them and is important to them. There were a lot of folks that decided healthcare planning and having the ability to make sure that they have a healthcare power of attorney or advanced medical directive so that somebody is making medical decisions on their behalf. That was key, and expressing their wishes regarding healthcare. And so I've just found that since 2020, it's been important to have people focus on the fact that estate planning is not just about death. It is about the journey that one takes from start to finish. And there might be a period of incapacity during that journey.
I think you saw a lot of estate planning work since the pandemic. 2020, 2021, I've heard for business, pretty great busy things for estate planners that I know.
That is true. We are no longer doing as many curbside signings as we once were, but
Okay.
uh, but certainly everybody's coming back in, and I think a lot of people want to have that FaceTime with their team.
Okay.
Uh, certainly they come in, meet with me. I'm sure you're seeing the same thing
Sure.
for those who want to come in. So there's the virtual option. There's coming in as well, but there's also been tax changes that have occurred in that time period. We've had individual retirement accounts, IRAs, have been impacted by the Secure Act that came into existence in 2020. This year, we've had the Corporate Transparency Act that impacts those who have limited liability companies.
Yeah.
And of course, we have estate tax exemptions that have been ticking up under the 2017 Tax Reform Act that are going to drop back down at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. So everybody has their eye on different things depending on their circumstances, but it's been a busy 4 years.
Yeah, I imagine it has been. So when people think of all these little things, most of the time they just sort of try to figure out how can I not screw this up? And so that next question, how can families avoid common mistakes? And I say families because this isn't really about individuals, is it? It's really about a family.
That's true. And I think one of the common mistakes that families might get into, and I ask this question a lot, is certainly families who have children or they're going to name multiple individuals to serve as a successor fiduciary. And when I use the term fiduciary, I might be talking about a trustee, an executor, a financial power of attorney, or a healthcare power of attorney. So it's someone who's going to be in charge when you can't be in charge. And families get into this thought of, I want to be equitable with my children.
Hmm.
And I then will ask the question, well, does that make sense? Will they get along? Will they agree? Will they actually abide by your wishes? Or are we going to get into the family dynamics or the past history? And it's, at the end of the day, things are not, your goals are not being accomplished.
Well, you mentioned the word or the phrase family dynamics a couple of times, and that's an area that we delve into with family governance, where we try to mitigate some of that, what happens. That's not a really good sentence, but like I know there's a way to structure that sentence that's perfect. I can't quite figure it out. But there's so much pre-work. We're planners, right? So you're an estate planner, we're financial planners, and there is work that we can do when we ask those questions ahead of time. And the key thing, and this is a piece that I think more of us could do a better job with, the key thing is then coming back to those conversations and ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to hear the reasons that your estate plan was set up in a certain way before they pass away, and argue then, and then come to Jesus at the end of it, and it be all done. Have you tried to encourage those who may put together the documents to then go home and talk to those who the documents affect?
I encourage it during the process, actually.
Okay,
Make
great.
sure when you're talking about going back to that fiduciary concept, have you asked the people that you are going to name if they're willing to serve? Have you asked the people who are going to make medical decisions, are they willing to make these, what can be very tough medical decisions? And it can be a very eye-opening experience for our clients. They think that, well, this person absolutely is going to make this decision and have no problem. And they go and have the conversation and they try to be transparent. And the reaction they get was not at all what they expected. So I certainly, before we get those wet signatures on the documents, I do encourage that folks do have the conversations to the extent that they're willing to. There are some families where they simply say, listen, this is what we're going to put in place. And my thought is that I'll be gone and they'll figure it out. And that's the family dynamics and that's the family governance that they have in place. And that's their choice. And that's what we do is we allow for the options and then ultimately our clients make the choice.
So I heard a couple of things in there. Number one, not just waiting until after the process is over to share the documents, if you even do that, but also if you've got a really good estate planner, doing that during the process, having those conversations during the process. Are there others for that next question? Other things that families can do to encourage better outcomes for the people that are going to be there behind? And even let's talk about life as well. Also, for those powers of attorneys and medical powers of attorneys when folks are still alive.
So I certainly think that having a conversation, whether it's during the process or after the process, having that family meeting. You mentioned family governance, having that family meeting so that even if you don't go into the weeds of the plan or you go into the details, you don't go into the numbers, you at a high level explain to your family, here's who you turn to, here's my team, and let me introduce the team. And here's the list of contact information. And if you, I think that's helpful because then folks aren't scrambling if there's a sudden event, if there's a car accident or a major medical event where all of a sudden it's, do they have documents? Where are the documents? Who's in charge? Those are the types of questions that come up that if you've had that family meeting
Hmm.
where you've at least high level said, answered those questions, and it makes for you being taken care of if you've now had a major medical event. So somebody's going to jump right on it and they know what you want. But then also following death, where to turn to. Who do I ask questions of immediately?
I love that. We recently, as a firm, made a heavy investment in technology for just what you're saying, to have everyone's advisors, everyone's strategic partners in one place and be able to give access to different members of the family so they can actually know, well, who do I call when the worst thing happens? And then what do I do? Well, hopefully those experts know what to actually do. And so you kind of, kill two birds with one stone and really make things work for the family. So important that that is done. Well, speaking of what sounds a little bit like process, give us an idea. What is the process like at OFP Law, and how do you manage it to make it essentially easy for people that don't really want to do this work, but they know they really ought to do this work?
Well, we start with a quick introductory conversation, whether it's virtual, phone call, in person. And before that, we hand out a questionnaire. And some people have found the questionnaire daunting. Some people who are working with advisors, such as yourself, say, I'm just going to have my advisor hand off the information that they already have.
Totally fine.
But the questionnaire is really helpful for clients to get organized. They've had a lot of life changes. They may have moved different companies. They may not realize they may have inherited assets. And so they have various things in various buckets and they've got to get it all organized. And so I ask that folks look at the questionnaire, but they don't have to complete it before we sit down and have a conversation so we can get to know each other. Because I really view the estate planning process, it's a relationship. It's hopefully a long-term relationship. And so everybody needs to make sure it's a fit. I'm sure you're similar in your process as well. And once we've gotten through that, what are the goals and objectives and how can we best serve you? And are we talking about basic estate planning? Are we talking about tax planning, more advanced techniques? Are we talking about charitable planning? Then we go from there and we know the trajectory we're going to take. And there might be several meetings, structure meetings, there's drafting, there's review meetings, and then eventually we come back together to sign. But that doesn't end the
No,
relationship
no,
at
no,
that
no.
point.
No.
Because there's always some follow-up. Depending on the structure, we've got to now enact the structure and make sure the advisor is up to date on what the structure is and make sure we fill the structure. And then, you go back to how can a family improve and get better income, better outcomes. It's also, don't just put it on a shelf. Make sure you pull it out. I tell folks every 5 to 7 years, 5 to 10 years, unless there's been some triggering event. Triggering event could be a diagnosis, could be a new grandbaby, could be for younger families, another child, could be a divorce, could be now you're in the sandwich generation, you have young kids, you have aging parents, you're taking care of people on both sides of the spectrum. So making sure you're always reviewing that plans to make sure it's up to date with your current goals and objectives, your current trajectory on your financial plan, and just also tax laws, because they keep changing on us.
Yes, they do. They keep both accountants and estate attorneys employed. And what I picked up on there was 5 to 10 years of a review. That's the minimum, because in all likelihood, your life is going to change with these things that you mentioned, people being born, people passing away, people getting sick, people getting married. And so that means more frequent than 5 to 10 years, doesn't it?
Correct. It usually does. I see folks every 2 to 3 years, something has changed. Going back to that fiduciary role, that's what I see the most times is going to change, is who is going to serve in that fiduciary role. With families with young kids, it might be guardianship. And so, it's important to just at least continue to refresh your plan.
Good. Well, let's go to this last question and speak a little bit more about the philanthropy. Now, we already touched on philanthropy and some of the structural stuff and who gets what when, but let's speak to a little bit of really, why does this animate you? How does philanthropy connect with what you do professionally?
I think it's giving back to a community is very important, and understanding what the community needs are, and who the community players are, quite frankly, from the perspective of, we live in an area that folks would describe as very affluent, but there are pockets of poverty throughout the area that are very eye-opening to those who really start to dig down into philanthropy and the nonprofit work that our philanthropy partners out there are undertaking. So for me, it's important to make sure that there's community awareness about those in need that surround us that we may not see every day.
Yeah, so you see this as a balance. On the one hand, you're working with, people who really need to put an estate plan together. There will be things left over. Most people actually do need to put an estate plan together. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And a lot of folks, again, they focus on the fact that estate planning, they think, well, that's about what happens to what's left after I pass away. But estate planning is a lot about incapacity planning these days. You might get in that car accident. You might be aging and develop dementia. You might have a diagnosis. So it's financial and medical powers of attorney. There's just a lot to think about, not just about death, but also about your life and your living, but you might not be in charge.
And then at the same time, philanthropy comes around there, because now once you've figured out what you want to do, you may decide that maybe little Johnny and little Susie doesn't get everything and you have a cause. And
right.
That's that philanthropic tie-in, isn't it?
Correct.
Oh, that's great. Well, this has been a great discussion. I know you're a busy person, so I will stop the share and I'll bring Big Faces back to the screen. And Catherine, I'll just ask you if there's one or two things, but really one thing we can hang on to as we've listened to, I think, a great introduction to estate planning. What should the people watching, this presentation take home in regards to the world of estate planning and your profession?
So from an estate planning perspective, most times folks have a difficult time beginning the process because they view estate planning as, well, I have to talk about my mortality. I have to talk about things that are not comfortable to talk about. So I go back to a saying and a phrase that I've had in my mind since about 8th grade. It's called begin the begin. Once you begin, you're closer to the end than had you not begun at all. And I view the estate planning process as that. Once you get over that hurdle of beginning the estate planning process, there are steps to take. You have, your partners that help guide you through those steps, help build that roadmap for you. And you are then closer to completing that estate planning process. And you can, you have a lot of clients where you say, have you done your estate plan? And I have a lot of clients who say, I can now go back to Jason and tell him I checked that box.
That's right.
So, so I think it's important to just begin, to start that process.
Begin the begin. Catherine F. Schott Murray, Esquire, shareholder, Odin, Feldman and Pillman PC in Reston, Virginia. Thank you so much, not only for being here, Catherine, but for being a friend all of these years. I look forward to continued partnership, and maybe we'll squeeze in one more lunch or coffee before the end of this year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason.
Wonderful. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank
Absolutely.
you, everyone. With that, we yield the balance of your Thursday. Bye for now.